Hello and welcome back to the Book Love Podcast. I am your host, Matt from Ohio, and today I'm continuing my journey into, I guess we could say, into feminism of a kind, um, with an award-winning Canadian writer. My guest today is Alison Gadsby. You know, sometimes we read books and stories are just stories. They're tales made for escapism and disconnection. But sometimes they're that and so much more. They're meant to explore something deeper and present some very important messages about the world in which we live. And I believe that Alison's recent collection of short stories is one of the latter. Released in March of 2026, Breathing is How Some People Stay Alive is a collection of short stories that oscillate between psychological horror, existential and surreal absurdity, and a very large, unsettling dose of realism to explore parts of our world that not a lot of us think about every single day. Things such as the patriarchy and misogyny, grief, what is a family, intrusive thoughts, and many more things. And today we get to dive a little bit deeper into some of that while meeting the author herself. So, all that being said, Alison, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I am so excited to sit down and talk to you. Honestly, I appreciate the invitation and I appreciate anyone who's listening right now.
These stories feel intensely personal, like not necessarily autobiographical, not autobiographical, but definitely emotionally personal. But at the same time, they almost feel like they've been collected from all over as a way to give a voice to the voiceless, as opposed to being specifically in single individual's experience. As their creator, does the collection lean one way more than the other for you and how you wrote them?
I mean, right off the top, it's pretty hard for me to, I think, make people believe that there isn't emotional realism in these stories. I was a competitive swimmer as a kid. It took up a lot of my life, both psychologically, emotionally, and almost spiritually. It was a safe place for a lot of reasons. I am a mom. I was an abused child. I grew up under the poverty line. I was sexually assaulted. I had postpartum depression with all three of my kids. And so all of those things exist in the book, but they don't exist autobiographically. I wasn't, my dad never showed up to the pool drunk, which is one of the stories. But I did witness a dad showing up to the pool drunk. And I sort of just flipped it to imagine what the kids were feeling because I knew what they might have been feeling. So yeah, I think a lot of the collection is deeply personal, but absolutely none of it is autobiographical. I never dated a humanoid. I sometimes I
That
sometimes
you know of.
Yeah, it's true. Holy shit. I sometimes imagine how things would go or could go or what people might perceive of a certain situation. And so I put a lot of that into my writing, but I also have and have always had since I was a kid a wild imagination and a deeply emotional imagination. I used to make myself cry as a kid. And for hours, I would go down. We lived in a side split and we had a lower basement, we called it, which was like, the basement. And then 5 steps down was a concrete room with the washer and dryer. I used to go down there and lock myself into this room we called the beer cellar and cry for hours and imagine the worst possible thing happening to me, happening to my brother, happening to my sisters, and cry about it. And I think that that's a lot of what ends up in my stories is all of these things that I imagine people would have an emotional response to.
Another writer once told me that every story that they wrote was an opportunity for them to deal with something on their mind. And I'm curious if this collection of all these short stories kind of lines up with that, or was this maybe something else, maybe something more along the lines of like a personal therapy or catharsis session?
Um, I mean, it's pretty hard to deny the potential of catharsis as a writer, exploring difficult themes and subject matter that I myself experienced. But as a deeply thoughtful person who quite often gets lost in silence and thoughts, I don't know if I would describe the this particular collection as deliberately cathartic, but it certainly helped me. It helped, my dad died, and it was very, as you can imagine, as the drunk abuser, we had a beautiful but difficult relationship. There was a lot of love from me toward him, but not a lot back. And so some of the stories are me exploring, hey, I wonder what it would how it would feel to imagine slipping him some pills while he was dying to sort of just expedite the process because this needs to be over now. And he took 4 months to die, which in retrospect was a very fast death. It was a summer, and I was at the hospital every single day. But at the same time, there were quite a few days where I thought, let's get this going
Speed
here.
it up.
We're all dying here. Your 5 children are dying because you know never told us that you loved us and abused us, and now we're like, oh, here for you. So yeah, I think there is always an element of catharsis no matter what you write. I mean, even I'm writing these stories right now that are weirdly, criminal weird criminals, right? Like one of them, which one of them recently published, Workplace Injuries, is just about this housekeeper who hates folding laundry. And she decides to pull a bookshelf on top of her so that the couple that she works for will say, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And, they can't fire her because a bookshelf fell on top of her, but they also can't demand more of her. So she's like, well, if I could just like have a bit of a break folding the laundry. And so, she works for them for another 2 years and doesn't fold another pair of underwear because she deliberately pulled this bookshelf on top of her. So, is that catharsis? I don't know. I hate folding laundry. That's that's where that's maybe it's a hidden message to my husband. I'm like, I don't listen. I'm gonna pull a bookshelf on top of like, don't make me pull a bookshelf down.
Was the release of all these stories was were the your family, your loved ones, your friends in your life, were they surprised by some of these thoughts, or was this like, oh yeah, that's Allison, it's par for the course?
Um, I think there are definitely people in my life who would be surprised by some of the stories, by the weird darkness and the horror of especially the humanoid stories. The people who know me, I'm not one of those people who has 80 best friends. I have two best friends, and a handful of really close friends, but I don't have a lot of people who know me. I don't share a lot about myself. I definitely don't talk about my childhood with anybody but my siblings, and I have 4 of them, which I'm so blessed to have. So, and I guess that's it with 4 siblings. Like I don't need to therapize my life with anybody because I have 4 siblings and we are all, dependently traumatized, codependently traumatized. Yeah, I'm not sure if that answers your question, but I don't think anyone would be surprised. I think people would be surprised, but not people who actually know me would be surprised.
And I know you just mentioned horror, and earlier I mentioned psychological horror, some existential and surreal absurdity, and even like realism and stuff. Um, but that's my take on it. How would you advertise like the genre or description of these stories to people?
I certainly think that there is horror to it, and partly, my saying that these stories are horrific is that because human beings can be horrific to one
Yes.
another, and the dark depths to which I explore postpartum depression and intrusive thoughts are accurate. I had terrible intrusive thoughts, that I didn't speak aloud because I worried someone would come and take my kids from me. So, there is this element to fiction, which I think is true of the best fiction, and that is it explores the things that we're afraid to talk about. And all of the things that we are afraid to talk about are in some ways scary and horrific and dark. Um, the humanoids weren't meant to be horrific. They were meant to
They
sit.
are.
I know, I know, I know. But they were meant to challenge the reader's perception of what we are capable of as humans. And at the end, you mentioned before we started that last story, you know, at the end of that story, I think it's possible that people would think that those human children are terrible children, that they
Are
would,
they?
but are they? Do you know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like what they did and to whom they did it. w- w- I mean, is that really horrible? Like, am I a horrific person if I pick up a radio and smash it on the ground? I don't, so it's that kind of challenging of empathy and challenging of thought. And I think for a lot of people, we're kind of caught up in the way that we're supposed to think, in the way that we're supposed to see the world, and the way that we're supposed to experience the world. And for most of us, and I really do believe for most of us, we are often trapped in these horrific thoughts, the potential of a terrible death, the potential of a slow, painful death, the potential of losing our partners, losing our children, losing our friends. The anxiety of loss is with us every single day. And for people to deny it, I think is what is more unreal than what I talk about in the book, I think.
Yeah, and just for listeners, the story that Allison is referencing is literally the final
Mhm.
story in the entire collection, and it's a banger. So the whole concept is to challenge our or have us question human versus technology based upon our feelings and perception, not necessarily based upon objective fact.
Mhm.
And it is a banger. So the point is, read all of the stories. Don't.
Yeah.
um, and speaking of the entire collection, the title of this is "Breathing is How Some People Stay Alive," and I find that to be such a fascinating title for two reasons. One is because you do have humanoids in the story, and they're not people; they're not
Mhm.
breathing as we are. So that's interesting. But it also implies that breathing has nothing to do with how some other people survive. I recognize that it is literally the title of one of the stories inside of the collection, but
Mhm.
um, what was your choice behind landing on that as the title for the collection?
I think, and I might speak for a lot of writers, it is so hard to find a great title, to imagine a great title that both alludes to what's inside the book, but also speaks to what the writer wants to say about the book. And it was in the final round of, not the final round of it, my final revision. before I'd even sent it to the publisher. My final revision, I wish I could remember what the working title was, but um, it was "Breathing is How Some People Stay Alive" for quite a while before I had even sent it off. But it was in reading that story that the character Christine, she's in the car with her husband, and they're going to his boss's house, and she's kind of reliving a sexual assault and imagining how all these people in the world are just existing. You know, they see this couple on the corner, and she's like, they're just standing there, like the world isn't coming to an end, you know? And her husband is like, you know, come on, like, why does this have to be so hard? And, you know, it's hard for her because she's existing inside this thing that happened to her when she was 18. And, you know, he does this deep sigh at some point in time, and she loses it because she's just like, not only does she recognize that he's exasperated with her, you know, like, how dare you be exasperated with me? I'm barely surviving over here on our way to your misogynist, disgusting boss's house, you know, who had been accused of sexual assault. And, you know, she's like, don't do that. Like, do not do that. And he's like, what? Breathe. And he's the one who says, breathing is how some people stay alive, in this like sort of sarcastic tone. And she is quieted by that because she thinks, wow, like for some people, it's just that easy. It's just that easy. All you got to do is breathe. And she's choking to death on this trauma. And so then as soon as that came to me, I was like, oh man, like it just speaks to so much of the novel and so much of how many of the women are struggling to survive. You know, there are 3 stories with postpartum depression. There are a number of stories with um, Calypso, who's barely surviving, Claire, who's barely surviving. And so, and there's, you know, also stories of people who are thriving, but there's also a ghost, you know, who doesn't breathe. And so when I thought about that title, I thought that's the title because breath is both so precious and so impossible to achieve. That calm, that like breath that comes with calm.
It is very interesting. I've learned through practicing yoga, and I'm not learned enough to know where in the world they got it from specifically. But the idea that your breath is your spirit, and when you
Mhm.
don't have breath anymore, I actually read a review of your collection online from, I'm assuming it was probably an ARC reader, that mentioned how this set of stories is such an, a written honor to the idea of endurance. And um, while I understand that point, I'm not necessarily sure that I agree with it 100%. Like, I understand where the sentiment is coming from in the review. You know, many of the stories depict, you know, women. There's a couple that the male is the lead, but like they're, you know, they're harmed intentionally or not by their significant others, their parents, other family members and friends in one way or another. And um, it's definitely not right, but it so certainly is reality for so
Mhm.
many. And we continually refer to the people who endure this stuff as strong. And that makes me wonder, through reading your stories, if we've been lauding endurance as a virtue, or if praising endurance is really just normalizing everyday suffering.
Yeah.
Um, would you, going back to that book review, would you characterize these stories as an homage to enduring life, or would you maybe characterize them as potentially like a spotlight on the cause?
It's such an interesting way to examine existence. And, you know, in so many ways, we're all enduring life, there's no meaning to it, right? For me, I'm an atheist, right? I don't have the kind of light at the end of the tunnel that some people with faith have, and I envy that. I really do envy the way some people live life, knowing that there is this serenity and light and beauty in the afterlife. Great. I don't live that life. I live life uh, grabbing hold of joy and happiness, and even grabbing hold of the pain and the suffering, because in some ways that does change you and make you different. I don't know if better is the right word. A lot of people use that word better, but I think that often after barely surviving a traumatic event or a traumatic childhood, we're not necessarily better for it, which I think is what you mean when people sort of applaud suffering because it makes you a better person at the end of it. We're just different people at the end of it. And, I don't know if I would trade my childhood for anything. There was a lot of beauty in it. I have 4 siblings who are magical to me. They are literally my heart and soul. I love my mother to bits. We live together in this home, this multi-generational home. And so that childhood gave me all that I have. I love poetry. I love writing. I love reading because my father loved poetry and loved reading and loved writing. And it was the way that I connected to him and desperately tried to get him to love me. But the idea that endurance is something inspiring is not, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, because when you're really trapped in a terrible life, and there are so many people trapped in terrible lives, I think it is, and I'm going to say quote inspiring, because I don't know if any of us is enduring the same thing at the same, on the same level. But certainly when I was trying to stop drinking, I found inspiration from the suffering, kind of I guess the sort of reminder of suffering that drinking brings to your life. I needed to get out of that, and I needed to know that someone endured and someone survived and someone got over it. And
Almost
so
maybe like if they can do it, I can do it.
yeah, kind
Or
of. Kind of. And also, this idea that yes, I'm carrying a lot of trauma in my body, but I also hold a lot of joy too. My childhood wasn't only, poverty and abuse. It was swimming. It was my brother and I walking barefoot to the lake. It was, there was a lot of joy there. And so I think, but endurance is a strange thing, right? Because one of the things that you had talked about before we got to this point was this idea of what does it mean, right? Like what does endurance or hardship mean, and how does it affect life? And I think that there are two things happening with parents. Very few have found the beautiful middle ground. Any parent who tells the world that they have found this beautiful, perfect parenting middle ground is lying 100%. But there is this thing that parents do, and one is to give their kid hardship, right? To either neglect, abuse, silence, ignore, whatever they want to, however a parent wants to label it. They might think that they're being a good parent in doing all of those things because they're teaching their kid to endure. They're teaching their kid how to live with hard shit, like
how to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. That's an
exactly,
American
exactly.
phrase. Heck yeah.
Oh my gosh. Oh my, it's not, it's not happening in Canada too, but, and then there's the flip side to it, right? Like this idea that we can somehow eliminate all hardship from our children's lives. And, you see it from
Yeah.
you see it in the grocery store when, a kid is screaming for the phone, for the tablet, for the you know corn puffs or whatever it is, and parents, in order to make sure that their kid doesn't experience even one moment of hardship, hands over the phone, hands over the tablet, puts the corn pops into the cart. And, like, what is that teaching a kid, right? That you can whine and complain and cry, and hardship will be taken away from you. And, you know, and I saw it a lot with when my kids were swimming, that a lot of parents would, sit with me on the deck, because I was a master official and also a swimmer, just knew a lot about swimming. Parents would often come to me for advice, like I'm a great parent, I don't know, but, um, and a lot of parents would say they just don't like it anymore. They don't wanna swim anymore. They don't wanna get up early anymore. They don't like, it's too hard. They're not, they just don't love it anymore. And the reality was, it wasn't paying off for them, right? They weren't winning.
Yeah.
They weren't beating all the other kids in the pool. They were the slowest in the pool, or they hated competition because they never won anything, and what's the point in doing it if I'm never gonna be able to go to regionals or provincials, or that big city meet in Windsor, or wherever. And I used to say to parents all the time, like, this is not about the end result. Like, this is not about, who they are at the end of it, an Olympian, or, university scholarship owning, varsity swimmer. It's about enduring. It's about learning how to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and do something that's really hard. Push your body to do something hard. Push your mind to do something hard, so that you can do it. And so when parents are like, "Yeah, yeah, we're pulling her at the end of the month. She's just not getting any joy from it anymore." And my response was always, "No, because it's too hard." And I don't know what parents are teaching their kids by removing those things that are, quote, "too hard."
Yeah. I know for myself, there's plenty of times that I'm very grateful for being forced to do stuff from the time I was 9 until I was 18 that I
Mhm,
didn't want to do, but growing up in the late 80s, early 90s, you don't have a choice. You just
mhm,
got to do it. And and then sadly, as a 40-year-old, you kind of look back and you're like, what would childhood have looked like if I had been able to do things that I wanted to do, or things that I could have excelled at more? So that middle ground, you're right.
mhm, yeah,
But like the forcing your children to endure thing, I definitely see dividends from that in terms of working job. You don't want to do a job every day, but you've learned how you just do the thing. You got to stay in it and you have to persevere. And
mhm, yeah,
yeah, but I definitely see what you're talking about with various sets of my friends and their kids, and the differing parenting styles, even inside of the same house. And
mhm.
uh, but you can't say anything to them.
No. No. You gotta, share podcasts with people, and, get them to read books, because all of the hard stuff, I mean, but I Desmond Morris, I don't know if you know him, he's a zoologist and anthropologist who just died, and his book, Baby Watching, was my, um, guide to parenting when I first became a parent, because I didn't understand parenting. I was 22 when I got pregnant for the first time, and I was like, "What am I doing? Well, I have no idea what I'm doing." And Desmond Morris's Baby Watching book taught me that motherhood is not only instinctive, but babyhood and childhood, and all of the in-betweens is also instinctive. And so a lot of kids, they they make decisions that go against instinct because they worry more about what other people are thinking
Yes.
and what other people are doing and how they will be perceived by the world if they are, you know, not the fastest, not the best, not the excellent, not the, uh, icon of success, And so because of perception, they go against their own instincts, their own love of things, their own joy, their own experiences. And I wish that parents would have conversations about that with their kids.
Conversations would be key. I know for
Hmm.
myself, the vast majority of my decisions in life in general, up until I was 35 or so,
Hmm.
was to essentially please my parents. To maybe not please them, that might be the wrong word, but to hear some type of praise or pride or good job, attaboy kind of BS.
Hmm.
So, like, I know you're talking about it as a developing child, but depending upon the household, that'll carry on for a long damn time.
Yeah, and I think honestly, I mean, there is something to be said, and I've talked to my kids about this, right? Like the two of them have not yet completed the frontal lobe development, and so there is this idea that and again, it happens in animals too, in the animal kingdom. Like there is this thing that happens with animals that the animal mom goes, "You're done now. Like parenting is over." And for
Sink or swim.
humans, yeah,
Go
for
back to your swim.
humans,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. For humans, parenting actually doesn't end until the frontal lobe is developed. But parenting doesn't have to come from the parents, right? Like learning how to be a human, learning how to love yourself, learning how to work hard, learning how to be joyful, learning how to suffer grief, learning how to suffer loss, all of that doesn't have to come from parents. And so I feel a lot of times parents don't recognize that their kids, from let's say 18, let's say adult, like the official adulthood, um, they don't recognize that their kids from like 18 to 26, when the frontal lobe is allegedly fully developed, at least for girls, for those born biologically female, the idea or that recognizing this 18 to 26-year-old child of theirs has actually brought in a group of educators, right? Their friends, their coaches, their teachers, their professors, their bosses, their colleagues. They have people in their lives educating them on how to be in the world. And parents don't have to do that all the time. And I think that's what parents forget. What parents forget is, and it's probably earlier, it's probably teenage years, really, to be honest, that you have to kind of allow your kid to make the mistakes, to fall and fail and lose and wither and trust that the other people in their life
Be there for them.
will be there, that their
Yeah.
friends are going to say, it's okay, Matt. Like, that really sucks that that happened, but like, bro, like, let's go. Let's still go to the dance, even though she broke up with you, like, let's do it, instead of parents intervening and saying, you don't have to go to that dance if you don't want to, Matt. Like, it'll probably be really hard if you go to the dance and if you see Becky dancing with another boy, like, it's probably going to be really hard. You shouldn't go.
Goddamn Becky.
Right? And so I think parents just have to trust that their kids are gonna have people in their lives to guide them, but also they're gonna have people in their lives
Yeah. Yeah.
who are gonna try and guide them.
And I think that's almost like being taught by the system to a certain degree as well.
Mhm.
Maybe I read too much into some of your stories. Maybe my dumb male brain took
No.
a couple leaps of assumptions, but I couldn't help but see not a blatant. I never felt like I was beaten over the head, but it was just this underlying, perhaps even causal type of concept, with misogyny and the patriarchy. It's never blatantly put out there in your stories, but it's very subtly like, if the system had been different, perhaps all of these different women that you're writing out about, or from the perspective of, would not necessarily have the lives that we're reading.
Mhm.
Um, and I'm guessing by the nodding that you would not necessarily disagree with my take.
I mean, as far as I'm concerned, the book belongs to you now, and I like, for me, it if it stirs up thoughts in you about stuff like that, I'm grateful, really. To be honest, I'm grateful that any man would read the book, and that any man would wanna sit down and talk to me about it, to be honest, because there is a lot of, I mean, statistically, I think we all know that men don't read women, um, as much as they read, men who appear like
Yeah.
them. Um, and women read more widely, but so I am grateful that you read the book. I'm grateful that you thought anything about anything in this. And for sure, the patriarchy is explored because it just exists for these
Yes.
women.
Yes.
And, the like Christina in her trying to grapple with what happened to her as an 18-year-old, there is this thing, and it happened to me, and I'm sure it happened to a lot of women. There is this thing that that we believe as women, because our body responded in a certain way, we must have liked it.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Be,
Yeah. I remember. Yeah. What you're talking
be,
about. Uh-huh.
yeah, and because um, we put ourselves in a situation that called for that, you know, that we are culpable. We are implicated in what happened. And so that is the patriarchy, right? That is why um, Christina's holding it all inside, because she's never felt comfortable talking about it out loud, because what happened, once she starts describing it to someone, they're going to be like, why'd you get in that guy's car? Like, you and your friend joked that he was a homicidal maniac. Like, why did you get in that car? And, the intrusive thoughts, um, for the mom, the intrusive thoughts are there because she can't talk to her put together husband with his misogynist dad. She can't talk about it because what is she going to say? I wish these two boys were dead. I dream about it every day. I dream about their funeral every day. I don't want to kill them, but I want them to be dead. Like, how does a woman say that out loud without being
Yeah. I think the
told
words she actually uses is I don't want to hurt them. I don't want to be the one to unalive them. I just wish I could wake up and they weren't there.
100%? And
Yeah.
and that was my life, anywhere from 6 months to a year with each of my kids. And, you can't say that out loud because they're historically, women were locked up for stuff like that, for that hysteria, for that m mental illness, right? Like, we were locked up. And so in speaking those words out loud and not having the language or the psychological and therapeutic language to be able to say, "You know what? These are just thoughts. These are just thoughts. They're not real. Like, I don't want my kids to die." Um, and so, yeah, the patriarchy is in the collection. It exists because that is just the construction of the world. And even Mirabelle, the woman with the humanoid husband, right? She's got a humanoid husband who was her humanoid boyfriend because her dad didn't believe that another man could possibly love his extra large daughter, his, like, 6 foot five.
You did definitely make her extra large.
Yeah, and that, and I exaggerated that, but, that's my
Yeah.
life, right? Like, I went from 5'3" to 5'10.5" over grade 8 to grade 9. I literally became
Other person.
an entire other
Oh,
person
yeah, that's yeah.
between grade 8 and grade 9. And so when I walked into high school as this 5'10" and a half, and I was, still slim at the time, whatever that means, but I was still, swimming had just finished for me. So I still had my swimmer's body, I guess, however you want to describe that. But I walked into that school immediately trying to make myself smaller. How can I be smaller? Because I know men don't like this. This is not the body that men are going to run after? And so that's the patriarchy. And while I don't actively think about it when I'm writing, I don't actively indict it or explore it. It is just the world in which women are living right now.
And I suppose even more than just that women are living in, as a dude, I can't help but look back on life and think to myself, I had zero malicious intent. I had zero negative
Mhm.
thoughts. I have 3 older sisters. I've been friends with girls over boys my entire life for whatever
Mhm.
reason. But
'Cause you have
how
sisters.
many how many instances can I think back to in middle school, high school, and even college and just say, "Oh, is that what they're talking about?" Like, the patriarchy often historically often refers to like institutions or systemic
Mhm.
things that prioritize men over women. Um, but but I often wonder if that's an accurate definition because I don't feel like the government or the cops or whomever made me uh, unknowingly complicit in it. So
Mhm.
what is the difference between systemic patriarchy and just cultural patriarchy? Is there a difference? Because I
Yeah.
feel like one more than the other is what I read as the underlying cause in your books and in your
Mhm.
stories, I should say.
Yeah. I think to talk about what we were not to, over talk about the, parenting thing, but parents treat boys differently. I wish that parents understood the implications, the long range, embedded implications of allowing their boys to figure shit out and helping their girls figure things out. You know, there is this idea that, boys get all of that unnecessary hardship that we talked about earlier more than girls do. And, I don't know the statistics. I'm not a scientist or a child psychologist, but I think in my anecdotal evidence is that boys are given hardship or not saved from it. And this is that kind of um, what it means to endure, what it means to be a real man, you know? And so the cultural patriarchy, I think, is just making men into these emotionless, overly masculine, denying the feminine people who then become, 20, 30, 40-year-olds who don't know how to emotionally connect with themselves. They don't know how to emotionally connect with partners, with intimate partners. They lack the basic requirements of empathy and sympathy and care because they weren't taught how to emotionally connect to themselves, to their own humanity. And I think women are taught that. But also culturally, boys it's sort of believed, it's assumed that boys are going to figure it out. And then girls have to work hard. Like whatever girls want, They got to work hard to get it. And whatever boys want, you know what? Just wait until you know. Wait until you know what you want to do or who you want to be or whatever, because the world is your oyster. The world is your oyster, little boy. It's just going to open up for you when the time comes. And girls are taught that the world is not their oyster, that
Mhm.
it is not going to open up for them. And so girls find themselves sooner. They find out who they are and what they want, and they know how to cry, and it's beautiful when they cry. And boys don't cry.
No,
And yeah,
it's not manly.
and that is that, that horrific world we're living in right now. And in Canada, and I'm sure it's happening in the States as well. We've got these junior hockey players on trial again for uh, sexually assaulting another hockey player with a hockey stick, a mini hockey stick in the change room. And that sort of toxic masculinity, which is, we say the word toxic masculinity, but what we don't say is that it is um, an offense against feminism, femininity, not feminism. It is an, an, a disgust of femininity. And that disgust and again, that self-hate, right? Like I hate myself because I'm so feminine, or I hate you because you're so feminine. That disgust we hold against femininity translates in so many ways, right? Like it's the reason why trans women are despised, because there's just no comprehension. There's no world in which a dude would understand why another dude, and I say this, trans women are women in my world. I don't want to argue with anybody about that. Don't send comments. Don't find me on whatever. Trans women are women and trans men are men. But there's a reason why some people, and the language I'm about to use is not they're not my thoughts. There's a reason why some people think, like, why would you want to become a woman? Like, what's wrong with you, bro? Like, why do you want to be a woman? Like, fucking gross, bro. And so there's this like, uh, there must be something wrong with you that you, and again, using other people's language, that you want to be a woman. Um, why are we like that? Why do we hate women so much? Why do we hate the feminine so much that we are assaulting men who appear too feminine, and we are assaulting women who choose to identify as women?
I would even take it a step further and just say, why do we hate each other so much? Because you have the entire opposite transition with men wanting to be women and women wanting to be men. But
Hmm.
one could argue they don't want to be something different. They are
They,
already that thing, and the thing they
yeah,
see in the mirror is weird.
yes, exactly.
And so, therefore, why do we just hate people so much? Why do we
Hmm.
hate what we don't understand rather than simply trying to understand it?
Yeah, we lack sympathy. We lack empathy.
And obviously, things need to change. And
Hmm.
like, it would be super nice if we could just wave a wand, you know, expecto niceness.
Yeah.
But, reality kind of dictates that things need to change incrementally. So
Hmm.
I suppose if we were going to try to look at that based upon what we were talking, would you suggest, or do you think we ought to be changing culture first, or should we be changing systems and institutions first? Like, would something would something like trickle down feminism be a viable solution, or do we really need to start at the bottom, and every individual needs to change?
I think the easiest way to change things is what we consume and how we consume it. Maybe this is an individual thing, maybe this is a systemic thing. I think that film and television still contributes to negative stereotypes and the trope. women. I mean, I love a great Hallmark movie, but let's be real. The whole is someone's waiting. There's going to be someone who's going to save me from this terrible life is a trope in media, television, and fiction that is propagated. Do you know what I mean? Like, it really is propaganda to have people convinced that the grass is greener in a small town in Colorado, or that the grass is greener um, if I divorce my husband and completely change my life and go pray in India for 2 years. Like, the the idea that joy is achieved not in this moment, I think, is what needs to change. And so, culturally, systemically, individually, we are everything is implicated, right? That there is this tendency as individuals to believe that we don't have any power, that we can't be the change that we need in the world.
That we want to see in the world. Gandhi,
Yeah,
friend. Gandhi.
but that's not true. Do you know what I mean? Like I again, back to my trauma, but it's all about me, back to me. Um the like, enough of this systemic feminism and patriarchy, Matt. No, I'm kidding. The idea that, parents, we don't have to be our parents, and our parents didn't have to be their parents, and my kids don't have to be me, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, is absolutely true. In parenting my kids, I was the change that I needed to see in the world. And um, people fall into these holes, I think, of questioning everything they're doing, and I don't know what to do, and I can't do that, and all of that translates into, you can't do that. If I can't do that, you can't do that. And and then it becomes this inertia, right? And so people are stuck in this middle, in this mind your own business middle ground, where they can't be the change. They feel like they can't be the change they want to see in the world. Because what does little old me mean? I don't mean anything. So I'm gonna, you know, keep buying individual bottles of water and throwing them in the garbage instead of the blue bin. Or, you know what I mean? Like, because who am I, right? But you are one of 9 billion people. And so if 8.5 billion people are thinking that, well, what's me? I don't mean anything. If 8.5 billion people are throwing 20 bottles of plastic water bottles into the forest as they drive by the park, we're in big trouble. So I think is that, I don't even know if that's an answer.
No, I
It,
completely hear that, and I completely understand. I think a devil's advocate response might be, given the factories and the huge corporate pollution of our oceans and blah blah blah, what do my 5 water bottles a week really mean? Like, for example, if I stop driving my car and I lower my emissions, that doesn't change the emissions from all these factories around the world. The horrible, anyways, I'm not trying to be on a soapbox,
yeah.
but I'm trying to say the devil's advocate, I can understand. But on the flip side, you got to try. And if all of us can do that little stuff, and maybe we don't get rid of pollution, but maybe we get rid of 25% of it, what kind
Hmm.
of difference would that actually make? And would that ultimately increase our living conditions and our standard of life?
Hmm.
So,
But also, as an individual, you're changing. And this, I think, is that, again, the kind of like big world, small world that a lot of people live in. Like, the big world is so oppressive. The big world is just so,
yeah,
so much more meaningful than I am in my little world. But, the reality is, in your little world, you live in a neighborhood. You live on a
yes,
street with people. You live in a community that has people suffering and needs, people who need support. So choosing to not drive your car to the grocery store if it's 5 minutes down the road, actually kind of sort of helps your little world. You know, choosing to help clean up the park on, the Sunday that they have a park cleanup day or whatever. That helps your little world, right? Like, it might not have a great impact on the entire global problem, but it has an impact on your little world.
It might have a impact on the global problem if all of our little worlds get better. Doesn't that kind of equate to the big world getting better?
100%.
But maybe a different way to
100%.
frame this type of question and argument is, a message, at least a message that I often hear, and I
Mhm.
hope you've heard it. I know that my very lovely wife has heard it, especially in corporate America. Uh, but I think it also might be a thing from just the 80s and 90s specifically, is change has to be within it. Like, we are constantly told to work on ourselves. You got to heal yourself. You have to advocate for yourself. You have to better yourself. Go get this certification. Enhance your skill set. Blah blah blah. Right. But if I'm going to bring it back to your book, I guess so many of your stories almost depict individuals who have seemingly given up instead of trying to better themselves. And so I'm curious, because on one hand, with the small world, the small environment, um, part of the framing, you're advocating for that. But then these stories are almost like, is it worth it? Should we just call it a day? So I'm curious, what do you think of that advice when we frame it in these two different kinds of ways?
Well, I think the idea is that, we have to cut some people some slack, right? Like, there are people barely surviving in this world. And, it's the reason why I give shitty cafe workers and servers so much grace, and so much I give I'm known in my little world for giving too much benefit of the doubt. And I think it's because I recognize that each individual, like anyone I encounter during the day, could have just lost a parent, just lost a child, just lost their job, could be like, Christina, swallowed up with the trauma from their childhood. And so, who am I in my little world to impose upon another human being my bullshit day? And so I think what I want readers to get, right? Like, I'm not necessarily advocating for Claire in the trunk of the car saying,
That was
this.
a I'm sorry, that was a hilarious story. It was a traumatic AF, but her complete and utter counterintuitive response to the situation was one of my favorite things to read in the entire book. It was great.
Nice. But it's like, I don't know if she's given up, you know what I mean? She's really sad that her brother Cam hasn't talked to her in 2 years. They had this shared trauma, this connection, and she misses that. She's now wandering the world alone with all this trauma. And so, it's kind of the intrusive thoughts come home, right? And hey, all those intrusive thoughts, all the dreams about dying and all the kind of going running in the dark at midnight, things that you were trying to do because you didn't care about dying. Well, here it is. What are you going to do now? And what she does at the end, it's a pretty open ending, but what she does at the end could be, seen as decisive or, stupid. But she I think a lot of us are living that way, that we're just like, uh, today's as good a day as any to die. I I don't like, I'm not living joy day to day. I'm not thriving. I'm not happy. I'm not, and a lot of us have been in that situation. Hopefully, a lot of us find ways to get out of it. But a lot of us have been in that situation where, you're like, if someone abducted me and threw me in the back of a trunk, I wouldn't be mad about it. You know, I wouldn't be mad about it. And so that's what Claire's going through. And
It's not funny,
but
but it's
it's
funny.
not.
I'm sorry to laugh.
I
It's
know, I know, and it's like,
a
I'm not
horrific situation to
advocate
imagine.
right. I'm not advocating for giving up. I'm not advocating for struggling either, you know? And I sort of feel like if we could all recognize that our next door neighbor or the person walking their dog with a grumpy look on their face, or the server at the restaurant who's not treating you like Midas, they are going through some shit, you know? They're about ready to climb into the trunk of a car and allow someone to take them up to the dark woods and lock them in a cabin. Like, if we recognize that each of us in some ways is surviving, not living, surviving, I think we would all treat each other better. And so I don't think the collection advocates for, pushing your father-in-law into the street to get him to shut up. But it certainly suggests, to father-in-laws, maybe
Shut up.
maybe mind your own maybe mind your own business. This woman just gave birth to a kid she didn't want to give birth to. Like, you know, imagine a world in which you empathized and sympathized with other human beings. And I hope some people get that.
I think, yes, I know when I ask questions on here, it's usually open ended and kind of devil's advocate to get, you know,
Mhm. Yeah,
answers
no,
and
I love that.
responses. But
Yeah.
something that I definitely took away from this is that I don't necessarily think that while the stories focus on characters that seem apathetic or numb or sad or potentially even dealing with sanity,
Mhm.
um, I kind of read it more as a way that perhaps feeling what you feel and being true to who you are in the moment might be a message that we need to take away. And that if we just understand that that is sort of the status quo and norm, we would be much more understanding of everybody around us. Something that I couldn't necessarily empathize with. Okay, I could uh, uh, sympathize with this, but I personally was unable to empathize given my lack
Mm.
of experience, right?
Mhm.
And those would be the intrusive thoughts, and they're very prominent throughout the series, and then clearly from what you've said whilst we've been talking, that's because of your own experience with them.
Mhm.
But I personally found it difficult to relate, and I was trying to understand why. And I was actually over at a friend's house just like 2 3 days ago, and um, he said something to me that was sort of an aha moment for me, and I was like, "Oh, I
Mhm.
got to put this in how I talk to Allison." And he said he'd always thought about bad stuff happening to him, but he'd never had thoughts about doing bad stuff to others.
Mhm.
And it's this latter idea that is most prominently featured through your stories. And I thought that was interesting, coupled with an explanation for the existence of intrusive thoughts that I had read, which is that of it being a survival mechanism, meaning like when the body senses some type of discomfort or uncertainty or danger or something, the brain tries to explain it to you and prepare you for the danger or to not do the danger by playing out a story, sort of like you go see the Grand Canyon and you suddenly have the sensation of, oh, what would it be like if I fell off the edge? Right.
Mhm.
Um, but I'm curious on your thoughts on intrusive thoughts. Wow, that was a weird way to say that.
Yeah.
Um,
It's not though.
and whether the whole survival mechanism theory can be applied to both kinds of intrusive thoughts.
So the Grand Canyon thing is interesting, as is the um being on a high balcony, right? Like, my mom can't go on a balcony if it's, higher than 7 or 8 feet. And that's actually Freud's death drive. This idea and belief that each of us in some way um, has a death drive, has a kind of innate thing that drives us toward death. I don't know a lot about it, but that is one thing. That's the explanation of the Grand Canyon. That's the explanation of why my dad had to lock the car doors when I was little, because I often opened the door and I going over the Burlington Skyway, which is a bridge between Hamilton and Toronto. Or and I grew up in a small town further south than that, but going over that bridge, I often had the desire to open the door and jump out of the car. That was a thing that happened to me quite a bit in childhood, right up until probably my early 30s. And, that's a death drive. That's a completely different psychological concept than what happens to a woman's body when she gives birth. Postpartum depression is a mix of the psychological and the hormonal. And so what is happening, hormones are, you know, I see hormones as two things, right? They're either the devil in disguise or they are the angel that we need. Um, hormones in a woman postpartum do crazy things, literally. And I say, I use that word crazy not as an insult to any woman who's just given birth. It is an understanding of what your body is doing right now is beyond you. It is absolutely outside of you. It's not even your thoughts. It's not your brain formulating those thoughts. It's not your mind actively generating those thoughts. It is your body. It is these hormones. It is the stress, the lack of sleep, the the adrenaline, the drop in serotonin. It is, this cataclysmic thing that happens to the human body after childbirth that is beyond your control. And for, severe uh, postpartum psychosis, it requires hospitalization because your body is so overwhelmed with hormones, and your chemistry becomes out of whack. Your brain chemistry becomes so out of whack that you have to be hospitalized to save yourself and anyone around you. But post, the average postpartum depression can,
Average.
whatever, can be anything from not wanting to get out of bed to me, the intrusive thoughts that literally followed me around like this like raging thing that I couldn't shake. No matter how I tried to rationalize, intellectualize, categorize them, like, just go over here for a minute because, I got to take the kids to the park. Like, can I just put you over here for a minute? And intrusive thoughts are like, bitch, we're here. Like, there's nowhere for us to go. And so, yeah, I think they're two different kinds of things. But I mean, the reality is all of it has to be talked about.
Mhm. Yes, it needs to be talked about. And
Mhm.
I'm curious. I could ask the internet. I know I could ask the internet. I understand that you are not the end all be all expert on this,
Don't ask
but
the internet.
I have become so untrusting of the internet.
Mhm.
I almost wish we could go back to 1999 and have
Yes.
that internet. But
Which was just the Encyclopedia Britannica, basically,
yes,
is what, yeah.
exactly. People started digitizing our reference materials. They
Yes.
didn't start putting their opinions out there. Anyway,
Right.
I want to ask you and get your take on this. Postpartum depression, because women are often having children later in life than they used to. I've been told and led to understand that sometimes postpartum depression can potentially overlap with perimenopause or what have you. The time periods are
Mhm.
maybe not overlap, but like PPD could have gone away, but then perimenopause starts, and so it like continues or something like. Does
Mhm.
perimenopause or menopause have any place in this discussion with intrusive thoughts, or are these two completely separate topics of discussion?
I don't know, to be honest. I mean, I don't, you know, I was 35 when I had my last kid, if I can do math properly. Um, so was I perimenopausal after that? I don't know. I think that also perimenopause and menopause happens at different times for different women.
Yes.
I know people who started perimenopause symptoms in their early 30s. I know women who didn't have perimenopausal symptoms until their late 40s, and depending on when your mom got her last period, it's pretty much like if your mom is your biological mom, it's pretty good that you're going to get your last period the same time your mom did. And it happened for me almost exactly. But again, here's the beauty of hormones, right? They're just a beautiful gift from your medical doctor, also known as the angel of mercy or whatever. That hormones can mess you up regardless. And I don't know, if you can say postpartum depression and perimenopause are or can intertwine. They certainly can, but I think it just depends on the woman for sure.
Okay. Um, with the intrusive thoughts, one of the things that I really wished for a lot of your characters, and
Mhm.
I say that because I don't want to call anybody out, you know, physically, but I wish they could have just talked to their significant others.
Mhm.
Um, but I also understand we don't. When I say we, I'm generally men. We don't understand and we don't have empathy for it because it's not something that we can really experience. Um, so I guess I can understand the concept that if my significant other wanted to talk to me about it,
Mhm.
but she just ended up telling me that she was been having thoughts about killing our children.
Mhm.
How would I take that? Would I be understanding, or would I just start throwing red flags everywhere and try to, like, freak out?
Mhm.
Um, so I suppose what I'm trying to get at is just because you have the thought, and maybe you can talk about this, just because you have the thought doesn't mean you believe the thought in your head.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep.
And how, because you see this in literature, you can see this in romance books and fantasy books and even your book. A conversation could just sitcoms wouldn't exist if people just talked, right? If characters just
Mhm.
talked. So in that vein, how do you think women could talk to their significant others or friends or family members about some of this? Because being alone with these thoughts without anybody is something that I can only imagine would make it exponentially worse.
Yes. So, this probably goes back to our discussion about, um, cultural and systemic patriarchy, because when a woman when the feminine is criminalized, right? And I say criminalized because why on earth would a handful of hockey players sexually assault another hockey player if they didn't believe that hockey player was deserving of it, whatever. And so I think that when the feminine is seen as negative, when we view quote hysteria, and people's judgment of hysteria changes from person to person, whether you think someone who cries a lot is hysterical, whether you think someone who doesn't cry, whether there's something wrong with her, um or them. Like, what how do you define hysteria as a man? And I think in understanding the negative bias, the unconscious and negative biases you hold as a man, and the negative unconscious biases everyone holds. toward women, right? Women are sometimes worse to women than men are to women, and that is not talked about enough as far as I'm concerned. I think that it would be a woman in another woman's life who would call CPS and have those kids taken away. I think a man would sit back in this like, "Oh, I don't know if I know enough about this to ooh, I don't know." But I bet you $10 a woman would be like, "Oh, 1-800, come pick this woman up." Because we've also got, like we talked about earlier, media's uh, interpretation and presentation of postpartum depression. And, the baby always ends up dead in a bathtub. And so, you know, if that's what people think of postpartum depression, then of course, if a woman says, "I just keep having these dreams of the kids dying in a car crash, and last night I dreamed that I pushed them over the edge of the cliff." And, so if you've got this mediated presentation of postpartum depression being babies dead in a bathtub, uh, yes, you're going to be afraid. So again, we go back to the individual and, systemic responsibility of representation. And that comes down to us talking about it. And so I was just talking to somebody on Monday. They just had a baby a month ago, and he's, what can I do to help my wife? He says to me again, like I'm some kind of expert, but um,
You're the
you
guru.
know, and I said, talking, talking is essential, and to let her know that there is nothing she can't say, literally nothing she can't say, that your understanding and appreciation, and well read, pick up some books and read about it. Understanding of these postpartum months is essential for her to feel comfortable. And, I will argue that two things. And again, this is anecdotal, not scientific, but I will argue that a person with postpartum psychosis is going to do all she can to hide it, because the drive is actually psychotic and out of her control. Whereas postpartum depression and the, diverse and varied responses women have to postpartum. I know so many people it didn't experience anything but joy and beauty and all the
And good
stuff.
for them, I'm guessing you're thinking.
Well, all the stuff we see it on the internet. That's the problem, is that nobody's going on to TikTok and saying,
Posting
I
themselves having the weebies.
I got out of bed at 11
Yeah.
o'clock and it's 12:15 and I'm back in bed. And my husband took the baby for a walk again, and I hope they don't come back. Nobody's putting that on TikTok, right? What they're putting on TikTok is this like, "Oh, here's me before, pregnant belly, fit body. Here's me after, 2-month-old baby, fit body, and joyful. Look how beautiful I am. Look how beautiful my life is." And so other women with 2-month-olds are thinking, I, I, s- oof, like, not only is my vagina at my knees and not up to where my perky boobs are like you, my mind is at my knees. And I mean, maybe that's why they're not making TikTok videos, because yeah, I can't imagine thinking beyond that. But again, we have to talk about this stuff, and we have to write about it, and we have to read about it, and we have to share everything about it, because everyone's so afraid of it. And all of the things that we're so desperately afraid of, we have to talk about it.
What would you say to, I know your advice to the to your male friend or acquaintance was to allow his partner to talk to him and
Mm-hmm.
to be completely open and candid, what would you say? Because I have a weird theory that so many people are performative rather than um, their actions coming from a place of like true unconditional love. You can say whatever you want to me because I don't care
Mm-hmm.
about that. I love you no matter what. Versus I'm here for you. You can say whatever you want, even if I'm going to judge you for it. I'm assuming that people can innately understand performative behavior versus true behavior. And
Mm-hmm.
how would that come into your advice? Because I think this is something that men need to hear.
I'm an extremely judgmental person. I have 3 sisters and a younger brother, and um, you know, I I'm a terrible person in private. But like that's just the truth. Like I judge um I use the C word all the time for against some people, male or female. I can use that word to describe you. Um, we judge. You know, my my husband rides his bike to and from work all the time, and he rode his bike home yesterday, and this guy was on his phone. And he had his phone in his right hand, and therefore had his left hand, which is the front brake, right? And he's on his phone, blah 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 blah, riding along the bike lane as fast as he can, and had to come to an abrupt stop, and braked with his left hand, and fell forward onto the crossbar violently. And my husband, even though he could empathize deeply with that situation, laughed so hard. He had to stop his bike and hold back for a minute because what an idiot. You know what I mean? And then when he got up close to beside him, he took a picture and he sent it to me. And we laughed and we laughed. And so there is this like performance of life. Like we're all performing, we're all trying to be good people, we're all trying to not be assholes, we're all trying really hard to be good people. But you know what? We're not Gandhi, we're not godly. You know what I mean? We're all just human beings, and we're all flawed, and we're all fallible, and we're all whatever. When I see people and in Toronto, we've got a really big problem. I don't know what it's like where you are, but in Toronto, we've got a really big problem with these scooters, like electronic scooters. And when I see people on these scooters going, and this is not an exaggeration, 40 to 50 kilometers, which would be 20 something miles an hour down our street. I live kind of close to a major street. You know what I think? I think I hope they go face first into a brick wall, which is awful. Like, I don't actually want that to happen. But when I see them on their scooter, they're not wearing a helmet, they're disregarding everyone else that's on the road, potentially a senior or a woman with a buggy and a kid who might come out, onto the street. Like all all of that is, I wish them harm. I don't mean it. You know what I mean? I don't mean it, but like it is what it is. And so if I'm sitting in the car and my husband and I are driving somewhere and we see someone like that, we share those thoughts because the performance is oh, maybe he has to be somewhere. Maybe he has an emergency that he has to get to, and like maybe that would be the good thing to do. But we don't have to be good all the time. We can be bad in the privacy of our own homes. We can be shitty in the privacy of our own homes. And the decision to bring the bad out into the public is where we falter as human beings. The decision to comment on a Facebook post. I hope that guy drives face first into a brick wall and dies. That's where it translates into, who are you? What do you mean? What do you mean? And so I think there's this, we're allowed to be who we are. We're allowed to have all of those thoughts, all of the things that rage, all of the things that muddy our minds on the day to day. We're allowed to have them. We're allowed to exist in our own minds. But when you bring it out into the world, that's when you have to decide who you're going to be. Like, who are you going to be to the rest of the world? Who you are to yourself, whatever. But who you are to the rest of the world, I think is where it matters more.
Speaking of things that exist in your own mind,
There's a
I would like
lot,
to
Matt.
say that with its intersection with intrusive thoughts, and the third intersection of your stories, I would like to say I really appreciate how you wrote intrusive thoughts, because some of them are just blatantly on the page, right?
Yeah.
Um, but others aren't even written, but they still exist. And I found that to be fascinating. Like, for example, I think it's in the story, Breathing is How Some People Stay Alive. You get the character she gets up from the dinner and she leaves. And she's had intrusive thoughts the entire story.
Mm-hmm.
But then she goes through the kitchen in order to leave the house. And all she does is she makes the observation that a burner on the stove was left on, and oh, there's a roll of paper towels next to it. And it's like story over. And then you, as the reader, have the intrusive thought for her.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, I
Yeah.
could burn this mother down.
Yes. Oh, please do. Please do it. Please do it. Yeah.
So, and then on that, I'm going to ask you if is that true to life? The just, you don't have the intrusive thought, you just have the observation, or is that simply genius implementation of like rhetoric and writing?
Mm-hmm.
But I also want to ask that question in conjunction with another thing with intrusive thoughts, because some of your intrusive thoughts in the stories are just thoughts, but then like, oh, that would be bad. But then some of them read almost like desirous or semi-twisted fantasies.
Mm-hmm.
And so are those true to life, or is that just simply a genius implementation of rhetoric?
Well, I mean, as much as I would love for literary critics to decide that I'm a genius, that I'm an I'm a like, untapped literary genius, I guess. I don't know. I have always enjoyed, as a lifelong reader, I take away from books. And I used to love talking to my dad about the impact of a poem or the impact of a story and, what it means. And I loved listening to him talk about what a story meant to him. And then I would go and read it, you know, like he had thoughts on Lord Jim, on Brave New World, on like when I was young, like 11 or 12. And so I read those books because I wanted to have those thoughts too. And when I read Brave New World and I didn't have those thoughts, I didn't have those same thoughts that he had, I was like, oh, what's wrong with me? I'm going to read it again to see if I can have the same thoughts that my dad had when he read it. And I didn't have the same thoughts. And I said, oh, damn, I'm going to read it again. And I didn't have this, and I just didn't see what he meant about how, you know, I can't remember exactly how he worded it, but he was like, basically he thought something about there was safety in that kind of like categorization, that people belong in a certain place, and there's comfort for people, even the most oppressed. There's security in knowing
The
that.
comfort and conformity. I think I've heard that
Yeah,
in
that
conjunction with Brave New World.
yeah, like there's something to be said about knowing that your life is going to unfold in a certain way every single day. And I all I got was fear, right? All I got was like, "Oh my gosh, like what if this actually happened, and who would
Yes,
I be?" Right? Like alpha,
me
gamma,
too.
like who would I be in that new world? And so for me, the best short stories, they're genius for me as a reader because so much of the characters' lives exist off the page and or in my imagination. And that great speculative fiction does that, right? Like a lot of what happens in speculative fiction exists in the reader's mind, which is I think why I've got all these humanoids, because I wanted so much of a reader's perception and a reader's understanding of life with humanoids, and life in this kind of unreal real world. I wanted it to be theirs, not mine. I have my own feelings about it, obviously, but um, and so the greatest short fiction exists off the page. And so I want readers to finish the story themselves and or imagine how they would finish the story if they were Claire in the trunk of the car and got out, you know?
Yeah.
And yeah, so both I think, both that I'm a literary genius and that I just like stories to be written a certain way. I like the world. I know and I'm so joking. I hope that people
People
listening
are gonna
under
catch on. Yeah,
people,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. Like I do not wield sarcasm. Um it, a better against anyone but myself. So just so everyone understands that, or the self-deprecating humor that my husband and I share, we toss it at ourselves more than anyone else. But the idea that a story exists outside of the 3,000 words um, is so true, right? Like you're not getting the whole story. You're not getting the big picture of these characters' lives.
Right.
You're getting a tiny little bit of it. And it's up to you as a reader to judge how that little bit fits into the big picture of those characters' lives or your life. I hope.
Love that.
Anyway.
I think what I'll say in response to that, and I think this can be said about your stories and about you. Uh, uh, I think we can have moments of greatness, of genius, without necessarily being great or a genius in and of ourselves. You've brought them up so many times, and I was saving them for last before we bring this thing to we land the plane. Humanoids.
Humanoids.
The book starts. I'm pretty sure the first story
Yeah, ring a bell.
is a humanoid abusive, freaky relationship that I was like, oh, we are buckled the f up, y'all. And then the final story ends with humanoids as children. Um, and throughout the stories, there are other humanoids as law enforcement and teachers, educators, live-in nannies, cooks, whatever. There's all these references to them, and almost the humanoids and the company, fantastic forms. The idea of being in the future is not in all of the short stories, but it is some connective tissue that kind of binds a world together
Mhm.
that all these short stories live in. And if you don't mind my saying so, I think the stories explicitly with humanoids are the most unsettling in the entire collection because it's so absurd and so real at the same time. Um, and so I've worked my career in software development.
Mhm.
And so the humanoids might feel different to me than others, but I really want to understand your humanoids as a literary device or perhaps an illusion or perhaps allegory or something. And so I'm going to ask a really big, long question and just let you talk, but like, are your humanoids a personification of how widespread the patriarchy or manosphere could be? Are humanoids more of a commentary on AI and our constant need to develop without even asking if we should? Are humanoids included for even maybe more of a simpler thing? Like they're merely an interesting take on the progression of our society and the future. Where did the humanoids come from? Yeah. Question mark.
So the funny thing about that is that now, as a reader going back to my own collection, the humanoids do a lot of different things for me now. And I try really hard to not answer that question with a retrospective vision of the collection now. So like it's all of those things now, all of those things that you say. But when I wrote the first story that I wrote with the humanoids, I think it was The Deal with Roger. That's the first one with Mirabelle. Um, I wanted to challenge a reader's empathy. I wanted to challenge their understanding of what it is to be human, what it is to need, what it is to want to be wanted and needed. And so that story comes from wanting people to understand that this we're living in a world where someone can't be happy if they're on their own. So much so that the dad buys her a humanoid because he's so afraid she's going to live on her own. And I think what we know about Mirabelle is that she would be quite happy on her own. In fact, happier on her own. But beside that, I wanted to create a world in which human beings took and took what they wanted and took what they needed, and then their reaction to it would be what was judged by the human reader as either being plausible or I understand that reaction. But then there's also in this world, and fantastic forms. Another question that I've gotten before is, is this the future? And I was like, no, this is now. Like I
This is
deliberately made them, they exist in today. And I mean, I almost put the date in one of the stories, but I didn't want to push it. The idea is that the potential that Fantastic Forms exists as a company built into a mountain in Wyoming that nobody knows about, and that there are humanoids walking around, and that the elite have them as wives and children and nannies and housekeepers. That is not implausible. And so I played Fantastic Forms is a company that exists. Not everyone who buys a Fantastic Form tells anybody about it. In one of the in one of the stories, it's alluded that the Prime Minister of Canada has humanoid children. And, he denies it. My kids aren't going to be used as political pawns, he says at one point in time. But, they're very clearly upgraded from one press conference to another press conference. And, the only people who are really excited about their humanoids are the ones who purchase them for staff, right? Like, look at me. I just bought this $150,000 model, and she not only takes care of the kids, but, she'll also
Take care of me.
take care of me because we paid extra for the upgrade. And so there's this kind of idea that humanoids exist for some people as a prod. Look at this thing. Look at how amazing I am. I could afford this thing. But then for other people, they exist as a secret, right? As we can't tell everybody that our children are humanoids because what does that say about me?
Yeah.
That
And
I
and and
that you
My
know,
fertility and our ability to procreate, and aren't we just failures?
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So I just wanted to play with the idea again, probably, how we judge each other and how we're just so awful to each other. We're just like terrible people when it comes to allowing other people to just exist, like, without judgment. And so there's that aspect, as well as, mainly, which was the real goal at the beginning, was to challenge the reader's empathy, and to have them really think about, like, how are they gonna judge those kids, the human kids in the last story? How are they gonna judge Mirabelle in the first story? I would argue there are probably readers who wouldn't think Mirabelle's a great person.
I don't know. There are layers, in my humble opinion, and I'm gonna let your answer stand for itself. But there are so many layers to what the humanoids do, the concepts that they illuminate, and I think it was very well done. And I don't know if you could have done that same thing with human characters. Maybe you could have, but I don't know if it would have been as effective. I don't know if it would have been as obvious. We've touched on a lot of heavy stuff today.
Mhm.
As a maybe because of the nature of your collection of stories, this is pretty typical for you. But I know a lot of authors don't necessarily go on a book podcast and have like heavy conversations. It's usually lighter. Let's talk about writing, and I like periods. But I do want to kind of bring it full circle for a moment and allow you to. What is the number one takeaway you wish readers would have from this collection?
It is empathy. It's exactly, it's an obsession of mine, I guess you could say, because the novel that comes out next year is a real indictment of, people making decisions for other people when they don't know their lived experience. And the novel that I'm working on right now is all about good and bad people. Self-described good, um, globally described good, globally described bad, and self-described bad, and all of the muddy middle, all of the people in the middle, who believe they're good but spend too much time minding their own business to actually be good. And so empathy is a real, it's a real, it is probably the worst thing that is happening to us in the world right now. The absolute destruction of empathy by the media, the obliteration of empathy by social media, the the damage that that is being caused with a lack of empathy is, to me, more devastating, I think, than anything we're going through as a species. And people avoid it as much as they can. I don't want to watch the news, it's so hard. I don't turn the TV on anymore because it's just terrible. I just can't anymore. I can't empathize anymore. And we talked again about leaving the house. My advice to everybody, and what I hope they take away from reading this collection, is that when you leave the house, take your empathy with you. Whatever fragment of it you have left. And so many people are are evolving into self empaths so that they can't feel sorry for anyone but themselves. Again, that's a huge topic that we don't need to get into, but the idea that, we can no longer feel for other people and their circumstances is a real human problem.
It is a problem. And I know that in corporate America, EQ is an entire skill set
Mhm.
that HR teams try to develop in their people leaders.
Mhm.
And what that means, and I know this because I went through it, is EQ is a skill set that you can train, and EQ is a muscle that you can train and grow, just
Hmm.
like your biceps or whatever. And don't don't let that muscle atrophy.
Yes.
Yes.
Don't be an asshole in public.
Yeah, do it in private with your significant other. Laugh
Yes.
at other people's misfortune. You mentioned a novel coming out, and I think your website says 2028.
Mhm. 20
But
it's either gonna be at the end of 2027 or the beginning of 2028. We haven't landed on an actual date yet. It is, literary fiction. It is, I have my son was born with a facial difference, and, I created a character for him. Facially different characters don't exist in literature, very often. I think if anyone listening right now, if I say read a book, tell me a book that has a character with a facial difference, everyone's going to say Wonder, and it's going to end there. So this book is set in the 50s and 60s, and it is a dual timeline book between a mom and her daughter born with a facial difference at a time when visible differences were criminalized. In many states, you couldn't actually leave the house. You couldn't walk if you had a visible difference, and they were coined ugly laws, that you were fined or thrown in jail if you left the house and walked in public with a visible difference. Um, and it was also kind of the start of the beginning of the circus sideshow. And so that's where it's set. It goes between this mom trying to protect her daughter as much as she can, and this daughter who wants to see and be in the world as she is. And at the time, there seemed to be only one option for her, and she took it. And so it explores autonomy, agency, chosen family, and it also explores the need for polite people in society to make decisions for other people.
that sounds like a good read.
I hope so. I really
It
hope
sounds like
so.
a really good read.
I
Um,
hope so. And it's called, did I say it's going to be called Dreams of the Weary?
you did not say. I did not ask for a specific title because I know that titles can change all the time. But Dreams of the
Yeah,
Weary,
I
I
don't,
love that.
I hope it doesn't change because it really is the heart of the novel.
Well, that is going to be excellent. And how best can we all get in touch with you and follow along so that we know exactly when it gets released?
Well, I just made my Instagram public, which is very scary for me, but you can follow me at ay.jay.gee. Um, but don't follow me if you're going to be mean. But if you are an amazing person, most especially if you are an amazing person who has a visible difference, please follow me. I am an advocate in the facial difference community here in Canada and participate in a lot of stuff internationally. So I invite visibly different and disabled writers. And if you're writing and you're living in the margins and you want me to read a short story, I will read that short story. If you're a writer who's visibly different or disabled and want to know how to write, send me a DM and I will help you.
On that note, Allison, I am very grateful that you are so willing to write stories that stare directly at these difficult topics, starts conversations about them. Because I think, you talking about divide being such a prevalent problem, I think now more than ever, we need to have the ability to refuse looking away from
Mhm.
uncomfortable realities.
100%.
And I appreciate you taking the time to write about it and talk to me today about them and being so candid with yourself.
Thank you. Also,
Um,
I will say, free Palestine.
I am a huge Dave Matthews fan and supporter. And throughout his entire 2025 tour,
Hmm.
one of the messages, well, he held signs up that said exactly that. And he also verbally had a message night in and night out that people will try to convince us that it's us versus them, but there is no them. There is only us
Yes,
on this planet.
100%. 100%.
So, one more time, everyone. The book, the collection of short stories, is called Breathing is How Some People Stay Alive by my amazing guest, Alison Gadsby. You should all go out and pick up a copy today. And I suppose on that note, Alison, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much, Matt. I really do appreciate you spending this time with me.
Please like, comment, follow, subscribe, all that good stuff. If you want to be in touch with either of us, all of our contact information will be, you can find it in the description down below. So thank you for clicking on this one. And until next time, everyone, cheers.